It's time for Football at 4 with Geoff Mosher.
I think our track record in the last 20 years, how many NFC East titles, playoff appearances, and appearances in the NFC Championship game, those are some of the metrics I look at, and I'll compare our record with almost anybody.
Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
All right, time for Football at 4. It is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast and brought to you by PropSwap, America's sports betting marketplace. Sell your sports bet and take your profit. Find out how at PropSwap.com or download the PropSwap app today. All right, Geoff Mosher's here. We got plenty of stuff to dive into as the Eagles continuing their voluntary mini camps. How many of the guys, Moshe, have shown up? What was this little agreement that the team kind of came up with here to get these guys out here?
Yeah, so apparently it was Nick Sirianni who made the first overture to the team and to try to get as many people. And I haven't heard of anyone not being there. That doesn't mean that's the case. I just haven't heard. But what he did was kind of negotiated what we would say is a kind of I will give a little bit, you give a little bit, a compromise. There is going to be no mandatory mini camp. And in return for the giving up of the mandatory mini camp, the players agreed that they would show up for phase 2, which started last week, and they would work with the coaches in the classroom. I don't know. I think they're getting on the field, but I don't think they're doing, 7-on-7s or 11-on-11s, but they are doing individual instructional drills and things like that.
All right, so there's a sizable amount of veterans out there. We know that Lane Johnson's there. Brandon Brooks was out on the field. That was good to see. It looks like – I know Lane Johnson has been cleared for training camp, correct?
That I don't for training camp, I don't know. I don't think that will happen until we get closer as far as a full official medical clearance for that. If he's out there right now working with things, it's because he was medically cleared to do with what little stuff they're doing at the moment.
All right, so let's get into a couple of things here. There was a lot of stuff that the coordinator said over the weekend that I thought stood out. So I want to start. One thing was offensive coordinator Shane Steichen, who was asked about, when he watches this team, what he sees. And he went to what a lot of people, I think this is kind of up in the air because it depends on what you think. He said, I watch this offensive line, and I see one of the best offensive lines in football. And some people will say, well, what year tape are you watching? And to which I said, well, he's probably watching the ones with Lane Johnson, Brandon Brooks, Kelsey, and Sayamalo, because those guys are going to be hopefully back on his line. So is he wrong when he says we might have one of the best lines in football?
No, and it's funny because I had the same kind of joke with someone on Twitter because I tweeted his comment saying that I believe his specific comment was even when he's watching tape on skill position players, his eyes couldn't help but gravitate toward the offensive line and how good they were. And someone responded to that. What is he talking about? Did he not, see last year? And I think my response to him was, you are permitted as a coach to watch tape from more than just the year before. Right. So obviously, if he wanted to get really good tape and know what he's working with Lane Johnson and Brandon Brooks, as you mentioned, and other guys, then he can dig in the crates a little bit and bring it up.
Yeah, and we keep kind of like talking about this here, which is if they could stay healthy, they've got one of the better offensive lines in football, and you wonder if just the offensive line is a major upgrade. What does that mean for this offense?
It's a great question. I mean, I always go by the theory that if you're strong in the offensive line and strong in the defensive line, you're going to be competitive. It doesn't mean you're going to win every single game. It doesn't mean you're going to be the best team in the NFL, but that is how good teams are built. It would definitely help Jalen Hurts in his development to have a healthy and strong offensive line in front of him. Good running game. You saw with the Colts, that's helped them kind of go through veterans. But even Jacoby Brissett had a decent enough year when he had to start there because they had good offensive line, good defensive line. And so it'll help get an idea. We talk about judging Jalen Hurts this year, right? And I've kind of brought it up that it's not exactly fair a lot of times. Sometimes it's obvious, like Justin Herbert last year. Sometimes it's not obvious. how would you evaluate Tua after 1 year last year? You saw some good things, you saw some bad things. But imagine if you had to make a decision right now on Tua being your guy. The Dolphins don't have to make that decision. They're going to obviously give him more time. But when we talk about the Eagles, we only seem to talk about Jalen Hurts as in this is your 1 year trial. What if he gets hurt for 5 or 6 games? So the bottom line is, the point is, it's going to be hard to judge anyone just on 1 year. So if you're only giving him 1 year, you got to at least surround him with legit offensive line, legit talent, and give the team the best chance it has to succeed.
Yeah, by the way, Shane Steichen said, these guys up front, I'll tell you what, now when I got here and started watching tape of these guys, and I was watching the skill guys at times, but my eyes would go to the offensive line. He continued by saying, this is a good group. This is one of the best in the NFL. No doubt about it. Now, obviously, he's the coach of the team, the offensive coordinator. He's not going to say, hey, we got a horrible offensive line, but he's obviously saying that's what's there. So skill position players, let's get to that a little bit, because he did talk about Devonta Smith. He did talk about Reagor, and he did point those two guys and talk about that. So he said when talking about Reagor, which I thought was interesting, was, how explosive he was, because I didn't see that on tape a lot last year. So whatever tape he saw of Reagor, I'd like to see.
Well, I mean, you have the 71-yard touchdown punt return. You have the 55-yard catch in the opener against Washington. There was another play, I think, against Dallas or somebody else. There were not an abundance of explosive plays, but there's not an abundance of snaps. He missed about 8 weeks of the season, and then he even missed a lot of training camp time when he hurt himself making the tackle. Plus, the offense was completely dysfunctional. So, yeah, I think that's what Shane was getting at, is that he's at least seen evidence on tape of when the ball is in this guy's hands, he makes things happen. It just didn't get in his hands very much last year.
That's true. So with that, you've got those two guys. You got a first-year player. You got a second-year player. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, if he even makes the team in his third year, he's the senior member with Greg Ward. So do the Eagles need a veteran wide receiver on this roster?
Well, certainly they're in a very unique situation, right? I mean, this has to be, I didn't do the math, I haven't looked, but you'd have a problem. I'm going to guess that this is the youngest wide receiver core on average age in the NFL. You just mentioned their oldest receiver is Greg Ward. Now, technically, he's going into his 5th year, but 2 of those years were practice squad years. It's not, he got called up in 2019. So if he's on the team this year, it's really just his 2nd full year and 3rd year of playing NFL football. And that makes him an elder statesman, along with J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. And that's a big issue with this group, Mike, because while there's youth and talent, there's guys who really need to grow up, mature, and learn the lifestyle of an NFL player who devotes every minute of the time that you're at the NovaCare to being in the books and being diligent in practice. And when you had a bunch of first and second year guys last year, I know that was not the case, and that needs to be the case. Everybody, I'm not saying these guys are bad guys, but some of them came with reputations of needing to mature a little bit, like Watkins and Hightower. And they weren't really around anyone last year who was going to take them under their wing. Deshaun Jackson's never been that guy, and he was hurt for most of the year anyway. And the same thing with Alshon Jeffrey being out for most of the year. And then him coming back, in a sense, had the opposite effect on Travis Fulgham,
right,
who also, came here after stints with 2 teams. And as Adam Kaplan's reported a little bit, they felt he needed to kind of understand the NFL life a little better than he had. So that's why when you talk about, does this team need a veteran wide receiver? Does it need somebody to take him under the wing? I don't know that they need it, Mike. I just think that they need to grow up as a unit. I think Devonta Smith will help because he is one guy that the book on him is not like the others. He's professional. He's Alabama University of Alabama through and through, meaning he acts that way, like a Nick Saban coached athlete. He's going to be dedicated to his craft, and they need to follow that kind of lead. But if there was a guy out there, which there are some names out there, I think there are some guys I would take a flyer on.
All right, let's get to that in a minute, because obviously today Julio Jones making some news where he essentially, I don't even know if he knew he was on live television, saying that I'm out of here, which had everybody up in a firestorm. But he apparently doesn't want to play for Dallas. That kind of was part of it as well. But this is interesting, Jeff, because the Eagles have been tied to every big player in their past because Howie Roseman, the trades, he always makes the call. So would they have any interest if Julio Jones was available, which appears that he is?
I mean, I would sure they'd have interest. The question is, how would they be able to afford him? He's not going to take a pay cut. I believe his cap number or what he's owed this year is around $15 million. We know the Eagles don't have that in cap space right now. Now, that doesn't mean he couldn't agree to a restructure and have that pushed down the road a little bit, but this is a guy who's been hurt a whole lot the last few years, getting older. How much you've already done this with Brandon Brooks. You've already done this with actually they didn't do it with Brandon Brooks, but they have done this with Darius Slay and Brandon Graham and several other players on the roster this offseason by giving them more money and kicking it down the road. And you're already worried what's going to happen if 3 or 4 of these guys get hurt or have steep decline. So, I would also wonder what would a trade for Julio Jones look like? What would you have to give up? I mean, it would help if they would take Zach Ertz, but would they take Zach Ertz knowing they just drafted Kyle Pitts and they already have Hayden Hurst?
Geoff, real quick, the team that gets Julio Jones, 3 years and $38 million, and he just turned 32 years old.
I don't know. Does that's the contract, but usually because the guaranteed money part will bring to Atlanta, it can become a 1-year deal.
$15 million guaranteed this year, $2 million guaranteed 2022, and then I think he's clear in 2023.
Right. So you could really just inherit the 1 year $15 million and have $2 million in dead cap next year, which is not a lot of money for the Eagles, who give dead cap money away like it's going out of style. But or you could just restructure it and say we're going to pay you $17 million and we'll just for bookkeeping purposes divide it over, 4 or 5 years. Either way, there's flexibility there. It's just that they would have to clear space and they still have to pay their rookies. So like I said, it would help if they took Zach Ertz in a deal. I just don't know if they would want Ertz when they already have Kyle Pitts and Hayden Hurst, who had a pretty decent year for them. Would they want a young receiver? Because now if you're bringing in Julio Jones is going to be your ex-receiver. You're going to have Devontae Smith and Jalen Reagor. What does that mean for guys like Watkins and Hightower and Fulgham? Was one of those guys going to trade? These are all hypotheticals, Mike. I'm just trying to figure out how you make the money work.
Well, I don't see
it almost becomes like an NBA trade, right? Where you like the idea of it, but how do you make the money work?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know. And by the way, up on the screen, if you're watching, there's the financials for Julio Jones. 3 years, $38 million. He turned 32. He's been injured. He's been kind of breaking down a little bit here. So that one, I don't know. As much as we always love the big name guy and the Eagles could use a veteran, I think a veteran wide receiver would be interesting. How about this? Are there some veteran wide receiver options that are attractive to you if you're not making some kind of, this is a trade the Eagles would make, in a former time. I don't know if this is the time for them, but are there other veteran receivers out there that make sense?
The problem is all the veteran receivers that are out there right now, Mike, are basically slot wide receivers. Like a Golden Tate's out there. Now, I have no reservations about Golden Tate going somewhere and probably being able to still catch you 45 to 50 balls, 400, 500 yards. I mean, I watched him play last year with the Giants, and he may not be he had a good game against the Eagles that second time around. I still think he can be a productive slot receiver, but the Eagles do not need a slot receiver. What they need is an X receiver. They need someone built like Fulgham, 6'1", 6'2", 200 pounds, just in case Fulgham winds up not being your full-time X because he just doesn't rekindle what he had. And Devontae Smith is going to move around. He can play the X, but I still think you want the bigger body contested catch guy. The name that really, struck me that was out there, and it's more on, I guess, pedigree than resume, is Josh Doxson, the former first-round pick of Washington.
That's definitely
hasn't
on pedigree.
Really played well. What's that?
That's definitely on pedigree, not
exactly.
Resume.
But that's the kind of guy you take a flyer on. I mean, he's going to sign a 1-year deal. There's going to be almost no guaranteed money. I think he's 6'1", 6'2". I mean, he's got good size.
He's a first-round pick.
He's a first-round pick, and you hope that in your system the light turns on. There have been some guys who just, Brashad Perriman's a good example of a guy who had a couple of bad first 2 through 3 years, and then the light came on a little bit. It's not like he's great, but he's still serviceable at this point. Josh Doxson still has to prove to somebody he's serviceable. Now, he was with the Jets last year. Just like being with the Eagles last year. I don't know how much you could have shown as a wide receiver with the Jets last year with all their offensive dysfunction. So, again, maybe he's a guy that I'm not bringing Josh Doxson in because I want a leader for my wide receiver group. I'm bringing Doxson in because he kind of fits a profile of a receiver I need, and it's low risk, high reward. If he stinks, he's just cut.
Yeah.
No big deal.
Football at 4, Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast. So when you look at the wide receiver room right now, how does this current group kind of stack up? I'm intrigued by, because I think I might have talked about this with you on Wednesday about, like, I wrote the 53-man roster. I know it's very early, and I have J.J. Arcega-Whiteside making that, and people like going crazy, like, they're done with him. But how does this current depth chart kind of stack up for you?
The way I see it right now, Mike, is that 3 guys are definite to have jobs, barring something crazy. Those 3 guys are Devontae Smith, Jalen Reagor, and Travis Fulgham. And Greg Ward, I'd say 90% sure he's going to be on the team. All right, so that's 4 guys. They're going to keep 5 or 6. So now for 2 spots, you got a lot of different guys fighting it out. You got Quez Watkins, you have John Hightower, you have your guy J.J. Arcega-Whiteside.
Not my guy.
You got well, he's your guy now. Well, you know how it is in the media when you make a bold statement like that, he's your guy. So those 3, you got Trevon Grimes, you got the Osmond kid. I'm trying to think if I missed any. I think that's pretty much your guys who are fighting for 1 or 2 spots. And to me, that makes pretty interesting competition. And it shows you that while we saw some flashes last year from Hightower and Watkins, doesn't mean they're guaranteed a spot on the team. They're going to have to fight it out. Like I said, they're going to have to mature. They're going to have to show they are better route runners now than that they catch the ball. We saw Hightower last year get open quite a bit and not catch the ball. So that's a good way to not earn the trust of your quarterback when you can get open and you just drop the ball. So that's what camp is going to be all about, and it's going to be a really interesting competition there.
Yeah, that's one that I'm looking forward to. You mentioned Watkins, Hightower, Grimes, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. They're basically 4 guys there battling for probably 1 or 2 roster spots on this team. So, all right, I want to go real quick to Jonathan Gannon, the new defensive coordinator. We focused a lot on the offense, but did you get any clues from Gannon? And I read a lot over the weekend about how impressed people left with his press conference, and just that, hey, this is a guy that it felt like, hey, this is a guy that's smart. This is a guy that is going to be a future head coach. But did you get any clues of what they might look like schematically?
Well, we talk about the offense, and it's definitely going to be excuse me a second. Sorry about that. I hit my own cough button for you.
We all have that happen.
There you go. A version of the West Coast offense. Now, you're hearing all of the coordinators echo the sentiment of the head coach, which is, we don't have a scheme. We're just going to tailor our scheme to our talent, which I do believe is the case. They're going to run certain plays and do things that are conducive to the talent that they have, but they have a scheme. It is going to be a West Coast style of offense, which we're used to seeing around here. And defensively, you heard Jonathan Gannon kind of talk about his mentors, right? And he basically singled out Mike Zimmerman as a guy who he spent some time with in Minnesota.
Mike Zimmer.
I'm sorry, Mike Zimmer. Yeah. Today's Dylan's birthday, right? Bob Zimmerman's birthday. So I must have getting those confused. But anyway, Mike Zimmer. And then also he talked about Matt Eberflus, who's the defensive coordinator in Indianapolis. Now, what I took from what Gannon said was that X's and O's wise, he's going to do some things that Zimmer does. Of course, he doesn't have the same personnel. They've got Kendricks and Barr at linebacker. They can do a lot of different things that I don't know if the Eagles can do right now with Alex Singleton, and Ryan Kerrigan is more of he can be like Barr as a pass rusher, but not as a cover linebacker. And of course, we'll see with Eric Wilson. He's probably most fit to run that Zimmer-style defense because he played in it. But Eberflus, he said, from him, I took the mentality, like, how do I want my defense to look on tape? He mentioned the HITS principle, which is hustle, intensity, takeaway, and smarts, I think is the S out of that. So to me, I don't know that he's going to run the pure cover 2, Tampa 2 style defense that Eberflus runs, but that Indianapolis defense is known for hitting you, getting quick to the ball. Guys like Darius Leonard, they fly to the ball. They're intense. They play. That's what they show up on tape. You watch Indianapolis defense on tape, you think that's a pretty good smash mouth lunch pail defense. So that mentality, I think he wants to bring that he got from Eberflus and his X's and O's. And this may take a while. He may have to get more of his personnel style in. Would look more like a Minnesota Vikings style defense.
That's hustle, intensity, takeaway, smart. That's the hits principle.
I like that.
It's like it reminds me of like Kurt Angle with his 3 eyes. Intensity. All right, never mind. Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN.
He's a true American hero, Mike.
That's me, right? True American hero, Kurt Angle. Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN, football at 4. Eagles continuing. So much going on in the NFL. There's so much we're going to be talking about this team through the summer. And then, man, training camp will be here before we know it. And this season's Ryan Kerrigan today, and actually he did the interview with John Clark on his new Takeaway podcast. I thought he mentioned something. He's like, hey, people keep kind of not talking about us. They don't think we're good. He's like, I don't think those people understand what they're talking about. And he, too, referenced the offensive line about that whole line being like, you might not, that and the defensive line. So this is going to be interesting, but we'll keep our eye on that. Good conversation on these wideouts. Check out the Inside the Birds podcast where they talk a lot more about the coordinators and all the stuff happening in the Eagles camp. He's Geoff Mosher at Geoff Mosher NFL, and like all guests appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. All right, Mosh, take care, man.
All right, brother. Have a good one.
All right, he'll be back on Wednesday. Tomorrow, Andrew is in the house.